Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar today. My name is Tori and I'm the Marketing and Communications Officer at Connecting Up and TechSoup New Zealand. Our webinar today is on Office 365 implementation considerations and is presented by Matt Walton from InfoExchange, and he's the Senior IT Consultant. We will have a question and answer session halfway through and then at the end as well. So if you've got any questions, please type them in the question box on your webinar panel and we'll go through them one by one. I'd now like to hand it over to Matt. All yours, Matt.
Thanks, Tori, and welcome everyone. As Tori mentioned, my name is Matt Walton and my role is a Senior IT Consultant, and basically I help not-for-profit organisations get the most out of their technology. So InfoExchange are a not-for-profit as well, and we only work with not-for-profits. So I get the pleasure of every day just helping not-for-profits deliver their mission, and that's really what technology is about. It's not for the sake of technology or getting technical, but really just making your jobs easier so that you can then go out and help the communities. So Office 365 is obviously a very popular topic at the moment since it became free for eligible not-for-profits about a year ago now. And then even more recently, it's Office 365, the hosting of that moved to Australia. So since those two things, it's becoming a very popular system for not-for-profits to move onto as a platform. So today we will talk through a range of items that hopefully will help you decide whether you're going to move to Office 365, and if you are, give you a few things to think about. So just as an overview, again, InfoExchange are helping a wide range of not-for-profits move to Office 365. Now, Office 365 can work for all sorts of organisations, ranging from a two-person advocacy organisation to a 1,000-person organisation that does disability accommodation, youth services, a range of things. So it is quite scalable, and we're doing lots of different migrations for a range of organisations. And essentially, each of these solutions is quite different, even though they're all using Office 365. Some are just using email, some are just using SharePoint, some are using everything, and they're all using it slightly different. So I think the challenge is finding the way to use it in a way that suits your organisation. So today I was planning on covering the high level, what is Office 365, what are the benefits, some things to think about in terms of staging, and then going through at a high level each of the key components of Office 365. So Exchange for email, SharePoint for documents, Yammer Link and OneDrive, talking a bit about the business case, and then linking you off to some other resources that could be the next step for you. And as Tori said, we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions about halfway and also at the end. I'm also happy for anyone to email me at any time or give me a call at InfoExchange. My email address is on the first slide and the last slide, so happy for you to just get in contact with me if you've got some very specific questions. The other thing to consider is I will send out, or Tori will send out, all of these slides. I have jam-packed the slides with a fair bit of information, so you'll be able to take that away as a PDF and sort of access that information on an ongoing basis. So I also believe this session's being recorded, so if there's someone else in your organisation that needs to hear this, or you would like to refresh your memory in a few weeks, feel free to access that, and Tori will send out all the information afterwards. So, many of you will already know what Office 365 is, so I won't spend too long on this. And there are also some other webinars, which some of you may have been in. Ryan's webinar, which is a high-level what is Office 365 webinar, where he gives a bit of a demo on each system. So that is helpful as well. So really, it's a range of things. Office apps and Office web apps. So essentially, in some ways, it can replace or can give you access to what you used to get on a disk. So things like Office 2013, which is the latest version of Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint. You used to get it on a disk. You can now get it through Office 365 to download on your local PC. Alternatively, it's also web apps. So you can use Word online, Excel online, those sort of applications on whatever PC you want. So you can go to a web cafe and access it through there. So that's one thing that Office 365 can give you. It is always up to date. So it's a system that, unlike installing it on a server where you need to do regular updates and maintain it, it's something that Microsoft look after in the background, and they offer a 99.9% service level agreement. So, which means it's very reliable, and over the last few months, and they publish these figures publicly, over the last few months it's been 99.98% uptime. So it's very reliable compared to having an Exchange installed on your server and having that risk of it going down overnight and waiting for the staff member to reboot the server in the morning or whatever process you normally use. So it does provide you with those systems that used to be server-based systems. So you used to have an Exchange server in your office or in a data center, same with SharePoint and Lync. Used to have servers for all of that and software. Now it's just all comes as part of Office 365. It does also give you optimized experience for across multiple devices. So you can use it on a Mac, you can use it on your mobile phones, you can use it on any device essentially. And Microsoft does have a lot of trusted certifications. So we'll touch on security and privacy later, but as far as certifications, and that they are one of the best organisations for that. So when we talk about Office 365, we're really looking at a suite of applications. Now, this changes every day. So some of you may have noticed there's a few Delve and Video are reasonably new. So those things on the bottom line there, the D and the V, they're both new features that Microsoft have added recently. There's another one that's going to come out soon called Sway. They will constantly be evolving this platform and giving you new things. You'll notice there's a couple of things that are also additional paid services that I have on my Office 365, which is what this image is from. CRM and Power BI, they're both paid services that you can integrate with Office 365. But most of you, the free version, you'll get those things on the top line, so mail, calendar, people. That's just your standard Exchange that you access through Outlook and tasks. OneDrive and the S for sites is your documents. Yammer's social media. And then you've got the online applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote. So we'll talk through these a little bit more in a minute. But I just wanted to give you basically that image is when you go to your menu, you open up Office 365, you just get a full suite of applications. So, what is Office 365 in a bit more detail? Now, you notice up the top there I've mentioned an E1 plan. Now, the E1 plan is what Microsoft are giving to not-for-profits or eligible not-for-profits for free. So that's why I've focused on that plan. So by default, you get free Exchange Online, you get Lync, SharePoint, Yammer, OneDrive, and all of the online applications, so Word, Excel, PowerPoint, OneNote, all for free. As far as the limits go, you do have storage quotas for each of these different applications. For example, 50 gig of email. Now, I challenge anyone, I have never seen a 50 gig email mailbox. Personally, I'm lucky to have 1 gig in my mailbox, and I consider myself a pretty heavy user of email. So 50 gig is a lot. and the same with the online storage. You get a terabyte per user for OneDrive. Now, a terabyte is a lot of storage, particularly when you're talking about business storage, and then you also get additional storage for SharePoint and other applications. So within that free Office 365 plan, you actually get the majority of functionality. Now, what you don't get, and I'll talk about the other plans later, is Office 2013 installed on your desktop. So typically we recommend that organisations install Office 2013 purchased through Connecting Up or TechSoup in New Zealand for, I think it's $42 at the moment. So that's a once-off purchase for $42, and you get Word, Excel, Outlook, PowerPoint, OneNote, all of those things for your desktop. And that's usually the most cost-efficient way of doing that. However, there is another plan on Office 365 which you can choose to buy, and some organisations that we're working with are buying this for $6.38 per user per month. Now, that's the not-for-profit rate. The retail rate for that's over $20. Now, a lot of the reasons that organisations purchase these E3 licenses is Office Pro Plus. So that's what I was referring to, that you can get from Connecting Up, Office 2013 on the desktop. So you can actually get 5 devices installed with Office 2013 or whatever the latest version of Office is. It will automatically update using Click to Run. So essentially your users can, if you have an E3 license, they can install, if they choose, Office on their tablet, on their mobile phone, on their home PC, on a work laptop, and on a work PC, all using one license at $6.38 a month. So a lot of people are using that for that purpose. There's also some other advanced functionality. So essentially E3 is the highest and best plan you can get, and it gives you a broad range of things. The mobile apps. So as I said, you can install Office on up to 5 devices, and the mobile apps are quite good at editing. Now, I personally wouldn't use the Excel on my phone to do a pivot table or any complex formulas, but for day-to-day stuff for most users, it's workable. Advanced email. Now, some people who are, we work with community legal centres and some organisations who really want to track and store every email sent by their staff, and that's Legal Hold. So essentially, if I delete my sent items, the advanced email functionality in Legal Hold will actually store that so that the organisation that I work for can go and get that later. So that's a function that a lot of people well, not a lot, but some organisations are using. And it also gives you archive. So it gives you another 50 gig of archive for each user. And the other ones are the eDiscovery Centre, so it's more advanced search tools, and business intelligence. So things like I mentioned Power BI before, you need the E3 license to then buy the Power BI license. So, but it does give you, the standard E3 gives you some business intelligence tools. All right. Look, there are other plans as well. There are SharePoint-only plans. There are Exchange-only plans. There are just Office Pro Plus plans. So if you just want Office, I think it's $3 at the moment, where you can just get Office. But typically what we're seeing is most organisations are getting the free E1 plan and a desktop version of Office. Now, I know some of you are interested in privacy and security, and that's important for many organisations. So one of the key factors around privacy and security of Office 365, being a cloud-based application or a suite of applications, there is a perception that cloud-based is unsafe, but I think what Office 365 is trying to do is allay some of those concerns, and Microsoft have done a lot of work to make sure that your data is secure and that the privacy of the data is sort of maintained. So one of people's concerns was overseas data. Now I can assure you now that Office 365 is hosted in Melbourne and Sydney. So there are data centres in Melbourne and Sydney that if you went and registered for Office 365 tomorrow, your data would live in Melbourne and Sydney. Now, there's a bit of a caveat there with existing clients. If you registered 6 months ago, your data could still be in Singapore, but they're gradually just moving everyone over by September. Now, even if it is overseas, all of this privacy and security really depends on a couple of things. It depends on whether you have any contractual obligations to store your data in Australia. Some organisations that we know have it in a state government contract, for example, that says they must store their data in Australia. Whereas other organisations, like Queensland Government, for example, and many that we work with, they don't care if it's stored overseas. The other factor is what information you're actually storing in Office 365. So many organisations that we work with, they store their client data in a client management system, stored on a server in their office or in a data centre. But they use Office 365 for emails or some non-client related documents. So that gives them assurance that they're not storing client data overseas, because they don't email client data around. The client data lives in the client management system. So there are ways to use Office 365, even if you have some strong concerns about Microsoft storing your data. And look, Microsoft do publish a lot of information around what security they put in their data centers and what privacy controls they have in their Office 365 Trust Center. So you can log in there and see all of their practices, how they lock down their data centers. To be honest, I've got another 20 slides that I'm not showing today about security and all the things they do to make sure that they're locking down your data. But I would encourage you, if you have concerns, to have a look at that Trust Center. And you do own and retain the right to store your data. So unlike some other providers, Microsoft will give you all your data back and not store it. So if you choose to go to Office 365 and then in a year's time you choose to go to Gmail, you can easily pull all that data off and delete it from Office 365. And that's, while it's some work to do the migration, it does give you the flexibility to move all your data around and choose to move if you are no longer happy with Office 365. All right, so what I was going to do next is just talk at a reasonably high level about each of the key applications, and then talk about things to think about when you're implementing each of those applications. So the first one I wanted to talk about was Exchange Online. So most of you would know Exchange Online as the information that you access in your Outlook. So mail, contacts, calendars, and tasks. Now Exchange, many of you would have Exchange on a server in your office. Some of you may be on Gmail, some of you may be on hosted Exchange. Basically what this does, it is the mail filtering system. So it tracks all your spam, so it does provide that spam filtering, and it saves you having that Exchange server in your office or paying for a service. Now, really the key things when you're thinking of implementing Exchange Online is what's your current infrastructure? Now, if you're going to access email and Outlook on Office 365, we would recommend things like, do you have Office 2013? Now, we would always encourage, if you're wanting to use the full capability of Office 365, we would suggest that you upgrade to Office 2013. Hardware, look, if you're using Office 2013, we would recommend that you explore your minimum specifications. Now, in this slide deck, I have some appendices, and I do have some slides at the back of this, which you can all access, that talk about minimum PC specifications, and even internet, some standard, you know, will your ADSL2 connection handle 50 email users and 50 people using SharePoint? So those type of considerations are things that you need to look at before you move to Office 365. You need to review your current users. So how many mailboxes do you have? Are you using things like public folders, distribution lists? Now, Office 365 does have the capacity to just replicate public folders and distribution lists and resources, but often we find it's a good opportunity to look at how you're doing things. Public folders really aren't the sort of the way to move forward in terms of the future setup of your Exchange. And there's things like shared mailboxes and resources and distribution lists that you can that we would encourage. So really the first step is looking at what you've got and what your requirements are. And then resourcing it. So look, some organisations can try and do email migrations themselves. We actually have a do-it-yourself workshop for some organisations that are trying to do email migrations themselves, but typically there is some risk involved in doing it yourself if you're not fully across it and you haven't done it before. So we would look at asking your IT contractor if they have the expertise, or if there is someone else you can leverage, a board member perhaps with some IT expertise that can help you with that. But while the technical components are important, you also need to manage the non-technical components, things like change management that we'll talk about later, communication and engagement of key stakeholders. So we will cover that a bit later. All right, so when you're assessing your email migration, really what you need to do is decide what type of approach you need and come up with a plan. So really, because there are more than one way to migrate your email to Office 365, and one of the things, it depends on the size. So if we're migrating a small 5-person organisation, it's obviously going to be quite different to if we're migrating a 1,200-person organisation. Coexistence. So there are multiple ways to do this. So for large organisations, you can actually have what's called a hybrid migration, which has your existing Exchange running in parallel to Office 365 for a period of time. So you can stage that migration. So that's a rich coexistence. But for many small organisations, what we do is we say, okay, one day you're using your Exchange, that evening we'll cut it over, and then the next day you're using Office 365. So it's a simpler migration. User provisioning. So again, there's a simple way of creating users in Office 365 where you can just do a manual creation or a CSV import. If you've got under 20 users, typically that's okay. But again, if you've got 1,000 users, you want to set up a synchronization between your local Active Directory and Office 365 to automate some of that process. One of the most critical pieces of information about deciding how you're going to migrate is where you're coming from. So if you've got an Exchange, and let's say you've got Exchange 2013, it's actually a little bit easier to migrate things from the latest version of Exchange than it would be from a system like Lotus Notes or Google, which is not as compatible. So really, that's when you're talking to someone who potentially could help you migrate, that is an important factor. And identity management. So again, this is, do you want single sign-on? Do your users just need an Office 365 account? Or do you have some applications on your servers in your office or in a data center that you want them to have the same password? So again, there's things like directory synchronization, there's federation services that can manage how you manage your users. So this is a summary of the migration options. So the first one is typically the most simple, and it's for small organizations with less than 30 PCs. Now I'm generalizing a bit there, but really this is something that you could do manually for users, or your support provider without a lot of Office 365 technical expertise could potentially help you with. And this is organisations using POP, so that's where the mail is stored on each PC. Or you can export to a PST file locally. So typically that's technically the most simple for small organisations. Now, IMAP migrations is something that people can do from Gmail, and it does synchronise your mail across between, let's say, Gmail to Office 365. Now, one of the issues with that is it doesn't bring your calendars and contacts and tasks, so you need to come up with a manual way of doing that, or a PST migration. Cutover migration is a good mid-size organisation, so between 30 and 100 users, which I'm guessing is a lot of you. You can configure your Exchange server to automatically sync information across to Office 365 from your Exchange server. You do need a bit of technical expertise to set that up, but then essentially it's one day you're using Office 365, Exchange, sorry, and then the next day you're using Office 365. So that's what they're calling a cutover. Now, staged and hybrid, the hybrid one in particular is for large organisations who want to stage their migration over several months. So we're doing a lot of these for large organisations who have servers on premise, and they have the ability to install this on their local servers and gradually move their users across. So if you want a stage migration, typically you would need a hybrid deployment, which requires a fair bit of technical configuration. So you need some technical expertise to set that up. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is SharePoint and some of the other applications, but I might just pause for a few minutes. Now we've sort of covered off email migrations and security and privacy and broadly Office 365. I might just throw to Tori and see if there's any questions, but I'll come back to some more questions at the end after we've talked about SharePoint and some of the other applications and successful implementation and business case. Tori?
Thanks, Matt. We've got a couple of questions here from Angela. It's in regards to the health information data for individuals. As more NGOs move to 365, instead of them having to get permission from the Minister of Health, finding the right person in the ministry to provide consent, has anyone at Info Exchange gone directly to the Minister and received their consent to save them time?
We have been working with some government organisations, but we haven't yet got an official consent from the state government. However, it does, as I mentioned, depend on each of your contracts and what that says about where you can store information. So now that the data is stored in Australia, it does actually fit within many contracts.
Easy. Angela also...
I hope that answers the question.
I'll see if she just replies, if that's covered, Angela. But she's also got another question. In the E3 plan, it talks of advanced email, whereby all emails are saved regardless of being deleted. Is this applied at a user level or organisational level? For example, does to save everyone's emails, would you have to purchase 35 E3 licenses?
Yes. So you only get that functionality if a user has an E3 license. So you can actually mix and match. So if you wanted to store the emails for 10 of your 30 users, then you could just give those 10 users E3 license and enable the legal hold, but not store the mail and enable legal hold for the other 20 who only have E1 licenses. So it's at a user level.
Angela says thanks to both of them. Andrew's got a question in regards to cutover migration from POP3. What if you're going from a web-hosted email to Office 365? So these cannot be coexisting, as the domain email hosting will have to go to Microsoft Office 365?
Yeah, so a cutover needs to be configured on an Exchange server. So if you're using POP or you're using a third-party mail application, you won't be able to use a cutover migration. You may be able to use depending on which sort of hosted application it is. Occasionally, if it's a hosted Exchange, you may be able to get access to it, but typically not. There are, in addition to those ones that I listed on that slide that's up on the screen now, there are also third-party tools. So we have a couple of tools that we use, particularly when we're dealing with third-party applications, that can pull information from hosted Exchange or other host applications. But they usually come with a fee, and they're often a bit complex to manage. It really depends on the host. Like, we're doing one at the moment where the only way we can get mail from an existing host is they're actually exporting all the PST files to a hard drive, and physically we have to go and pick up that hard drive and then upload that into Office 365. So it really depends how you can get access to that. So Gmail, we typically use a third-party migration tool.
Easy. Andrew says thanks. It's not on hosted Exchange, just POP3, so we'll have to do it all in one go, and it sounds like fun.
Yes.
Scott has a question. How well does domain synchronization work when you have a non-internet domain name, for example, local?
Yeah, that typically you would need to change that. So .local does cause an issue.
Okay. And Vivek has a question on Lotus. So how to move user contacts from Lotus to Office 365. They've got about 10 users. Do you have a tool you'd suggest for a small organisation with less than 50 users?
Yeah, typically with Lotus, I would use a third-party migration tool again. There's one that we use that is $12 US per user, but it just reduces the risk of doing it manually. So that one that I was referring to is MigrationWiz, so you can look that up. But and we have an account with them, and we use them for some of our migrations, and yeah, they have a tool that works with Lotus.
Great. That's all the questions for now. So I'll let you go on with the presentation.
Thanks, and as I said, I'm happy to take questions offline if I didn't cover any of those in enough detail. I'm happy to give some more information at a later date. All right, so moving on to SharePoint. Now, look, SharePoint is one of those massive things that can be lots of different things to lots of different people. I'm not sure if any of you have participated in, there was a webinar, I think it was last week, that one of my colleagues did specifically on SharePoint. So she did an hour on SharePoint, and I'm sure she could have done another 5. So we'll just skim over SharePoint, but really, to give you an overview of what SharePoint is, it's what you would call an intranet. Now, a lot of organisations are using it primarily for document management. However, it has some good functions, and we work with some organisations who are using it just as a project management tool. You see Kids Undercover there, they were using it really just to manage some of their accommodation facilities. You see the HR portal down there, that it has the functionality to do things like forms and internal administration functions. I know in our office I use it to do my invoicing and to do new starter forms. I've used it for incident reporting and a range of other things like that. So while a lot of people start using it for document management, the more advanced you get with SharePoint, the more you can learn about its other capabilities, and you can customize it if you've got some internal sort of basic skills to create new lists and collaboration tools in SharePoint. So Team Sites is another one that it's quite good at. Now, just to clarify, there's often some confusion about OneDrive and SharePoint. So I've put this slide up just to clarify that they are two different things. We would typically recommend that you use OneDrive for individuals' documents that are working documents that aren't critical to the organisation. So personally, I use OneDrive for a lot of my working documents on a daily basis, and I've got 1 terabyte of storage. I don't get anywhere near that. And that's really just for myself. Now, you can share using OneDrive, but typically we don't recommend that. Typically, if you want to have documents accessible to your to the whole team and on an ongoing basis, we recommend that you store them in a SharePoint library. Now, that's also important because if I store things in my OneDrive and then I leave InfoExchange, it's quite difficult to get those access to those documents. Now, you can do it from an administrator point of view, but if I store it in SharePoint in a shared library, if I leave, it just sits in the shared library and whoever else needs access to it can get access to it. So typically that's how we do that. There is a bit more of a complicated storage quota on SharePoint, but most organisations that we work with don't meet their quota. So there's usually enough storage space. So the other thing that OneDrive does, the desktop client, it means files can be taken offline. So personally, I synchronize my OneDrive and some SharePoint libraries with my desktop, which means when I'm on the train on the way home, I can edit documents and access everything that's in SharePoint or OneDrive, and then when I get home and plug back into the internet, that just synchronizes back up. So you can have our offline access, which we recommend. It does mean that it needs to synchronize on an ongoing basis, which takes bandwidth, and there's a risk that the synchronization may cause errors, but that it's usually, from a risk management point of view, it is good to have an offline copy. So, I hope that answers the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint. And every organisation is different how they use these as well, but they both have good document management functionality. Now, I didn't go into things like versioning control. It does keep a copy of all versions. Co-authoring, you can have multiple people editing one document at a time, and it manages that quite well. So, yeah, both OneDrive and SharePoint have that functionality. So really the first thing about when you're thinking of implementing SharePoint is what are you going to use it for? Is it just for documents, or do you want to use it for team sites or collaboration? Now we'll talk about Yammer in a minute, but some people choose to use collaboration in Yammer and documents and team sites in SharePoint. So there's creating that line of what you do in SharePoint and what you do in your other systems. And things like calendars, a lot of people choose to share their calendars in Exchange so that you don't need to create calendars in SharePoint, even though it can do it. Again, the first step is auditing your current systems and information architecture. So when we work on SharePoint projects, often a lot of the effort is reviewing your current folder structures in your file servers and then trying to work out the best way to set that up in SharePoint. Typically, it is not, typically we don't just dump whatever's on your server into SharePoint. Typically, we go through the process of reviewing and adjusting that. Again, resourcing it is very important, and having both IT and non-technical people, typically the comms or admin team involved in the project, is very important. If it's just an IT project, often it can cause issues because the change management isn't always there, and you need a good understanding of what the users are going to use on an ongoing basis and where the documents live, and often that's not an IT role. And the cultural implications. So if you're moving where all the users store their documents, it can be a big change for people, and they're used to storing things on their desktop or they're not sharing information. So that just needs to be managed. All right, so moving on to Skype for Business. So this used to be called Lync. What we normally say that Skype for Business you actually get as part of Office 2013 Pro Plus, and often we just implement it as part of the first Exchange migration, and we essentially just turn it on, users log in and start using it. So you can see on the top image there, one of the best features is what we call point of presence. So it allows me to see where people are and what they're doing within my organisation. You can actually have this externally as well. So I have some clients who I have external sharing with that I can see whether they're at the desk or not. So green is they're available and at the desk. And this is all based on people having Outlook open, and when you move your mouse, it knows where you are and offline. Now you can use video conferencing, you see down the bottom there, screen sharing, instant messaging. It's got some good function. Now you do need a decent internet connection if you're going to use this a lot for video conferencing. So look, often you can get away with using it for messaging and the occasional video conference on ADSL, but typically if you're going to have an organisation of 30 people using this, and you might have 5 video conferences going at once, you need to review your internet connection. Often we encourage headsets, and instead of just using your laptop, microphone and speaker. So it's really about how you're going to use it, but it is something you can just often do for free and easy to start just having a play with it. It doesn't take a lot of migration. Yammer, again, I could probably do an hour session on Yammer, but it is a tool that Microsoft bought recently and is now part of Office 365. So when you have an Office 365 account, you do get free access to all your users to Yammer. And it is something that's reasonably easy to set up. So SharePoint does take a bit of work setting up. Yammer, you can essentially turn it on and let users start creating their own groups. And it's essentially people call it a Facebook for business. So I use it, we use it in Info Exchange as all our little updates about birthdays or this is what I'm doing today. Things that you used to send emails around, the all staff emails, we encourage you to use Yammer. Now you can have embedded into SharePoint. So the picture at the bottom there is embedded into a SharePoint site. There is a desktop client where you get notifications when Yammer, sort of someone posts something to Yammer. And you can create groups. So we have an Info Exchange Yammer, but we also have, in my team, IT Services, we have a Yammer group where things just relevant to us. So you can create as many groups as you want in Yammer. and use it however you like. So it is more of that casual conversation. And that's where you can need to make the call of what you post on SharePoint and what you post on Yammer and what you send emails around for. So that's really that information architecture, essentially. Now, there is a free platform that some of you may already be using, and you can do it's a bit of behind-the-scenes work, but you can transfer your content from the current free platform to the Yammer Enterprise plan, which you get as part of Office 365. All right. Now, look, as I said, that was the last application I'm going to cover before I move on to the business case. As I said, there are new ones coming out every day. So Office 365 Video, it's like a YouTube, essentially, that you could use internally. There's things like Delve, which is like a search function. It allows you to log into your screen and see all your emails and SharePoint documents and things that are relevant to you. Sway is a presentation tool, a bit sort of replacing PowerPoint. So there are lots of things. Power BI is business intelligence, dashboards and those sort of things. So there are a lot of things coming, but yeah, we don't have time for all of them today. So one of the things and I'm trying to leave time at the end for questions as well. So one of the things that is almost the most important aspect of, particularly if you haven't implemented yet and you're just gathering information, really this is the business case that you can present to your organisation is one of the most important things. So really a lot of people are doing it because they're reducing or eliminating the need for a server or upgrading your server and saving the IT costs of managing that server. Now, I can't guarantee that you won't still need a server for your organisation. Some small organisations, maybe under 30, can get away with not having a server if they don't have any other applications and they don't need things like group policy or Active Directory. They can get away with not having a server, but the majority of organisations that we're working with, particularly between 30 and 100, still require a server for their applications and to manage their PCs and updates and all those sort of things. So it is very dependent on how your infrastructure is set up and what your requirements are. But typically, you could essentially sell Office 365 to your management by saying, look, instead of paying for this new $5,000 server and then paying someone $1,000 a year to manage it, we could move to Office 365 for free. And yes, the migration might take a bit of effort and cost, but that often people justify the move and the costs associated with that by saving server costs. A lot of people are also saving money with video conferencing and teleworking. So you saw Skype for Business and the instant messaging and point of presence. A lot of people, including us, we're a national organisation, we have staff in New Zealand. We are saving a lot of travel costs at Info Exchange by using video conferencing. And even me visiting clients, I can get away with doing some migrations for some clients without actually ever going to their physical location, because we can do it all remotely and I can video conference them. The third point there, defending against hardware failure. No longer do you have to worry about your Exchange server blowing up in the night. We often see, and I've been in the scenario as an IT manager at a not-for-profit where you lose sleep over what's going to happen with your server if it crashes. So we'll let Microsoft worry about that nowadays. And collaboration. So collaborating across locations is really one of the key strengths of Office 365. So increased efficiency. So typically that's SharePoint, but you can collaborate with sharing calendars, with Yammer, with SharePoint team sites, co-authoring on a document with someone in another country. So these are all ways that bring your team together, and creating a single source of truth. So no longer will you have 15 copies of the one policy on your server document drive. You will store it in one spot in SharePoint, for example, and 15 different people will edit it in that one spot, and potentially at the same time. So no longer will you have issues with wondering which version is the same, or saving things as different versions with people's names on them. You just edit, you save, and then you get out, and then it's updated. So that is really critical as to the value of SharePoint and Office 365. So, in summary, what we are seeing is the top 10 tips for successful implementation. And I suppose on the flip side, we're saying, we often see if people don't do these things, it can cause issues and create risk associated with the move. So these are the top 10 things that we're saying are important for you to consider. Implement the most valuable areas first. So often, and we didn't have a lot of time to go through staging today. Now I've got a whole set of slides on staging, but due to trying to cram everything in an hour, I had to take those out. But essentially, a lot of people are just doing email first, and maybe doing Skype for Business as part of that, and then doing SharePoint, basic SharePoint as a second stage, and then maybe doing more complex team sites and SharePoint as a third stage, maybe doing business intelligence and Power BI as a fourth stage. So it's okay to not do everything at once, I think is the moral of that point. Really explain the benefits to staff. So this goes to change management, and this happens with any project, not just technical projects, but you really need to show staff the functionality, get them excited, engage them, have some champions that can really help justify the move, and get them excited about things like co-authoring in documents, things like a team site, Yammer, those type of things. Ensure your internet bandwidth is suitable. So we would really, look, some of our clients are getting away with ADSL connections, but we typically recommend, if you're going to use Skype for Business and OneDrive syncing, that you should look at Ethernet connection, or even fiber if you can afford it, but things like a 10 or 20 meg upload, 20 meg download, instead of the old ADSL connection, which is a 1 meg upload speed. So doing a speed test on that, and just assessing that is important as well. Upgrading Office. I strongly recommend implementing Office 2013 if you're going to use Outlook and OneDrive and SharePoint. So it can work on Office 2010, but yeah, we typically don't recommend it. Use an expert. Now, again, we're not saying that you can't do this yourself. We work, again, with do-it-yourself workshops with organisations who we think may be able to do it themselves, and we support them through that process. But it is something that can be risky if you're not technical and you're just trying to do it yourself. So there is a risk of email going down and losing data if you don't sort of have the skills and expertise. Consider local storage. Now, I said you might be able to get away with not having a server. If you have large files and videos and a heap of photos, it's probably worth having a local server, or even a NAS, a storage device, that you can keep those on, so that you don't need to synchronize them up and down and chew up your bandwidth. And it does create a bit of performance issues if you've got a lot of data. Review your security controls and policies. So Office 365 has a lot of great, password, minimum password specifications and all things like that. But if you as an organisation are still putting post-it notes with your password on your laptop, then your security is really not, going to change that. And the same with who needs access to what information. So it's all good and well worrying about privacy and security of Office 365, but if all of your information is sitting in a server in an area where anyone could pick it up and walk out the door, and all your staff, including casuals and volunteers, have access to all your client information, that's something that you need to look at as part of this. Active Directory is good value for organisations with more computers. So this is another reason why you might still need a server. And if you do have Active Directory, you could consider directory synchronization up to Office 365. Again, if you've got above maybe 20 PCs, that's a good thing to think about. Online collaboration spaces in SharePoint can be valuable for board and volunteers. So we have a lot of organisations who just use it for their board. So having a board site in SharePoint is quite valuable and a good starting point for some organisations to store their minutes and task lists and discussion. And Yammer is good for collaboration and social media. So I'm conscious we've only got a few minutes left, and I'll leave some time for questions. Really, one of the things Info Exchange is doing is we are doing Office 365 readiness assessments. Now you can buy those through Connecting Up or TechSoup, and basically that is we would review your organisation and your requirements and things like how many users you have and internet connections, those sort of things, and then we would provide you with a report with some recommendations about how you could do Office 365, both email and SharePoint and other applications, and we give you some broad cost, example costings for that, and a bit of an implementation plan, even if you wanted to do it yourself. So they're $100 through Connecting Up and TechSoup, and you just buy them directly through the Connecting Up site. And the same with the do-it-yourself workshops. So we've got 3 workshops that we're running at the moment over the next 3 months, and we've just finished a series, and we're doing these again. We're doing one for basic email, so a PST migration. You can try and do that yourself through that one. Basic SharePoint, and also an advanced email. So if you're looking at directory synchronization or a cutover migration or a hybrid migration, it could be worth sitting in on those do-it-yourself workshops.
Sorry, Matt, are you still there?
Yeah, and we've got a few there, so I think we were just waiting to see if anyone had questions. I'm happy to hang around.
Yes, they do. Sorry, I just cut out. So we do have a couple of questions here. We've got one from Angela.
Sure.
It's in regards to Yammer. Who sets up the groups, and would that be the organisations or the users?
You can actually choose who does that. I would normally recommend that, if you're launching Yammer, potentially set up a couple of groups that you know are going to use Yammer, but then I would treat Yammer like social media and let users own it and let them create the groups that they think are relevant and let them drive it. So typically we find SharePoint is something that the administrators set up and drive, but what we're finding is Yammer, we're treating a bit more like a Facebook group where you let the staff own it, and often that helps with adoption. So, but technically you can do it either way. You can manage the permissions for who can do what.
And just with instant messaging, are those instant messages saved or backed up anywhere?
Yeah, they actually show up as a conversation in your Outlook. So they look, typically you wouldn't use instant messaging for things that you really crucially need. So that's, again, in the decision making or around whether you email or whether you instant message. But yes, that instant message information gets saved in your Outlook. So particularly for missed conversations, often if someone sends you a message and you're not available, it gets saved into your Outlook as well. So yes, it does get saved.
Thanks, Matt. Nitish asks, can we move our AD to Azure instead of running AD on our server?
Yes, you can. So we're in the middle of a project. We're doing that for another organisation now, where they're actually moving everything to AD in Azure, as well as a server for directory synchronization and some file archives in Azure, and they're using Office 365. So they're totally no servers on-premise, but there are some considerations around that, like you need VPNs potentially, so you need some local sort of high-quality routers that are capable of integrating with Azure, and you need good bandwidth as well. But yes, you can definitely do that.
Great, thanks, Matt.
Alternatively, so just one more on that, sorry, Tori. Alternatively, we have some organisations who don't have an Active Directory if they don't have any other applications, and all they have is the default Office 365 accounts. So if all you need is all right, any more questions, Tori?
Thanks, Matt. Sorry, I'm having a few technical difficulties this side. There are no more questions, so I will wrap this up quickly just because I'm having technical issues and I'm the one recording. So thank you, everyone, for attending today. We will be sending around the slides and the recording over the next 2 business days. If you do have any questions, you can actually email Matt directly, as he said, on mwalton@infoexchange.org.au, or you are able to email me at events@connectingup.org. Other than that, though, thank you very much, Matt, for presenting today. There are some great takeaways in that presentation. And other than that, I hope everyone has a good day.
Thanks, Tori. My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.